Okay, so welcome back to another Thursday on the Pagan Perspective. I'm Yucca, and this week we are talking about a rather political topic, which comes from Vivian's Storm, which is firearms and pagans. So the topic, I will post that below, but I'll go ahead and read it for you. It says, "Hello, I'd like to know your opinion as a pagan about the right to own firearms in the US and the actual debate. I'm from Spain, where weapons are strictly banned, so from my experience, I just can't understand the need of owning guns. And I wonder, how does it relate to the 'and it harm none' in case you follow it, or to your view of life as a pagan? Thanks a lot." So, to start with, I think that Rich and Eric did a wonderful job and really covered a lot of the points which I was planning to cover. I went ahead and watched their videos ahead of time just to make sure that I wasn't going to spend this whole video reiterating any points that other folks had already made. I especially really liked Eric's analogy to cars as being very dangerous and about guns being tools, as you know, all of that. Anyways, if you haven't watched their videos, go ahead and take a look at those. They have some really excellent points to make. So I want to try and focus on something, add to the discussion. And what I think is really important in helping folks understand where we're coming from, who are not necessarily from the United States or are and haven't really thought too much about it, in terms of the American relationship to guns and firearms and to our right to bear them, I think really has a lot to do with the cultural context. And when you look at that next to a country like Spain or any other country, every area, every country, but every region, every different group of people, we have different histories. We have different cultural histories and different political histories, which of course inform the cultural histories and attitudes. And so with the case of comparing Spain to the United States, if we look at last century, what was going on in our two nations were very different, and the types of values which were being cultivated and encouraged by our different governments. We have very different government types. For the majority, not the majority, but a large portion of last century, Spain had a dictatorship in which many of the rights, the ability to express oneself, even things like what children could be named was very limited. And that was the reality. That changed in the 70s with Franco's death. But that is a very strong part of Spain's history. And there are many people alive today who grew up in that era, who grew up in that political climate, in that cultural climate. And of course, those values, I think, have been passed on to the children very much. That's not the only thing that was passed on. That's not the only influence of values. There's many values which carried through that survived that Franco's period, but that's a cultural and political reality. If you in turn look at what was going on in the United States during that time period, there were many cultural changes that were happening. There were some not so great things, like the McCarthy era and things like that, but the focus on one's ability to express themselves on, as long as you weren't expressing like commie sentiments, but in general, the focus on individualism, the focus on protecting one's own, on that sort of thing was much stronger and much more encouraged in the United States. Not saying that's good, not saying that's bad, I'm saying that's different. I think that another huge difference between when you look at the United States and particularly the European states has to do with size, with just the geographic size. If you look at a map, even though warning, most of the maps you look at aren't actually accurate, so you should look at the actual square miles or kilometers of an area. But I mean, the United States is huge. Many of our states are the size of countries, and I actually lived in Spain for 2 years, in Andalucía, entre Sevilla and Málaga, y in País Vasco, and I would tell people that my state was almost the size of their entire country, and yet we were 2 million people. We were very rural, very spread out, and that really impacts the type of culture. Now, of course, the eastern seaboard in the United States is a totally different situation. It's actually much more close to what Europe's situation is. But in the rural culture, guns have a very practical purpose as well. And just looking at our history in terms of the valuing one's ability to defend themselves. But anyways, you know, the family that I grew up with guns in the house. I grew up knowing where the guns were, but I was also taught how to behave with a gun and to respect, you know, to really respect that, and to treat any gun, be it a real gun or not, always treat it like it's cocked and loaded, whether or not, even if you know that it's not, even if it's a prop gun. You know, I was taught how to handle it. But anyways, we lived a good 45 minutes away from any hospital, probably half an hour to 40 minutes away from the nearest fire station, police station. If something happened, we were on our own. And that's a reality for less so now as our population grows, but for much of the western part of the United States, I can't really speak to the eastern, that was a reality for us. And so we had it as a matter of protection, but it was also a sport. It was also, you know, my brothers and I would go out in the backyard and we would, you know, do target practice. Actually, my father did it as a competitive sport. So there's a cultural importance and identity around it. It's also, in the West, it's important for hunting. Hunting has come up a couple times in the previous videos. And just skimming through some of the comments about, I don't even remember any of the specifics of some of the comments people were putting up, but I wanted to put out there that actually hunting is incredibly important to the maintenance of our ecosystems right now. It's very, very carefully monitored, and the number of ungulates, you know, we classify them differently based on whether they're elk or deer, whatever, but the populations, we look at what the climate is doing, you know, what we go out and we measure the biomass and really look at what populations we need. And the reason that we have to do that is because the predators don't exist in the system anymore. And so if we don't do that, then the ecosystem gets really messed up, to put it in nice polite words. And unfortunately, it can't go back to the way it was because those species don't exist and because humans aren't going anywhere. We're going to stay there, so we're not taking our fences and our roads down. We aren't going to, you know, our ranchers aren't going to let them compete with their cattle. So it's a reality, and it's very important that we actually have hunters go out and behave as natural predators would. So putting that out there, that's kind of a tangent. I didn't want to go on too much of a tangent with this. So for me, I really believe in the right for individuals to protect themselves. I am not a pacifist. I believe that there is a time for violence and there's a time for not, and that really depends on the individual situation and one's values and goals. But if somebody's trying to kill you, you go ahead and try and kill them right back. So I really think self-defense is important. I'm hoping that I'm kind of covering this stuff here. There's so much to cover, but basically there's a cultural importance. Now in terms of the debate, and I'm guessing that this comment, because it takes us a little while to get to each of the questions. So I'm guessing this question was written earlier in the year when there had been a school shooting and there was a lot of pain, and the discussion came up again about increasing regulations on guns. My opinion about the debate is, for the most part, gun rights is one of the big trigger topics. You can start talking about abortion, gay rights, which is a quickly fading one as many of the homophobic population dies, because a large portion of them is actually, they are kind of left over from a different era. But guns, taxes, there's some topics that can get people really riled up, and I don't think really much is, I think they're being used for other purposes to distract us from this or to get us to vote for this, and that although important issues are being talked about, what you're seeing in the media, in my opinion, is a big game. And just polarizing sides and misinformation and all of that. But to move on to the "and it harm none" case, I actually gonna owe Cara a nickel or a dime in this one. Really, I don't believe that is actually possible in a literal sense. Like any other scripture, even though this isn't scripture because it's not written down, but any guideline, I think the sentiment is more important, because on a very literal sense, one cannot harm none, for we are living. And at this moment, my body, your body, every living human right now, every